Mr. Speaker, I have heard many things today, some of which have made me smile, and some have made me just felt despair about the future of this Parliament. But I want to say this, I've listened to lessons about structure and how to write a motion, which seems to be the only thing that one of those members could speak about. I've listened to extraneous matters that have nothing to do with the motion at all, and what I call smoke and mirrors, those to deflect attention from the real matter. I've listened to all sorts of matters, like the recent one of the last speaker, to do with vaccines that have nothing to do with the motion. And so I know that people were trying to fill in the time and to deflect from what were the issues. I've listened to levels of sanctimoniousness, just unbelievable. And I want to remind you why I'm so surprised. The bleeding hearts amongst us, you're good actors, I must say. The problem is that you have no substance. Bleeding hearts about people talking about thousands of public servants being fired. You've asked questions in this House and the answers have been given. And you cannot find the thousands, they're mystic, they don't exist. But what we can say to you is that you fired 1,972 Amerindian community service officers, those are the facts. You fired 7,000 sugar workers, those are the facts. You fired 2,000 public servants, those are the facts, because they happen to be the wrong color or the wrong political party. And you come here with bleeding hearts. Oh, you're good actors, but very bad substance. Mr. Speaker, I have heard crocodile tears about gods being angry. And the gods are angry. The gods were so angry with you that in 2020 you lost the elections. The gods decided after 5 years of your mismanagement and ineptitude that you didn't deserve to stay in this government anymore. The people gave you up, and that is a reality you have to come to terms with, and you've never been able to. Mr. Speaker, we have heard, again, sanctimoniousness. Let's hear. We heard the Honourable Member, Mr. Ramjitan, give us a lecture on the Public Accounts Committee. But the Public Accounts Committee from 1966 Constitution was always headed by the opposition. Always. The word main came in after the Constitution was amended in 2001 in the review of the Constitution because the then opposition, who was PNC alone, did not want to be sharing with the AFC, who was the other member of the opposition. And so Maine was brought in around 2003. But 1966 onwards, the opposition was always chairing the Public Accounts Committee. So it wasn't in the constitutional form that stayed. In fact, the Constitution doesn't even say that the opposition must chair. What it does say is the standing orders and custom and practice. Mr. Speaker, we heard sanctimoniousness, and we've heard about all sorts of accusations. But let me remind this House that in 2012, when the government, PPPC was in government and the APNU AFC had 1 seat more, they moved hurriedly to amend the standing orders, to change what is a government 5 and an opposition 4, to reverse it. And so it was reversed. The opposition got the majority and the government got the minority. However, in 2015, when the government, APNU AFC, won the government, they rapidly moved to reverse it back, to reverse the standing orders back. And so the standing orders remain as they are. And so this shows a level of opportunism It stinks of opportunism, actually, because whenever you get in government, you'll upside down the standing orders, and when you're not in government, well, you have to live with it. But the thing is, Mr. Speaker, is that we have the opposition in front of us, the APNU AFC. We have seen the level of bullyism during the 5 years of the Parliament in which they control. Not one motion of the PPC was passed. All our motions were defeated. Not one was amended to allow for any compromise. Questions were amended so they become less offensive to the government. We had very few sittings of the House, and so bullyism. And even when we came to the no confidence motion, you made us wait from November, the beginning of November, to the end of December to have the no confidence motion heard. When in fact, the same Erskine Mays you're quoting from says that the government should rapidly and with alacrity hold a no confidence motion so that, in other words, to shore up themselves. The issues of the motion before us. Mr. Speaker, it is very clear from the minutes of the PAC, which were approved, that there has never been an intention in the motion, and it is there in the minutes appointed and adopted on March the 15th of the February 1st minutes, that the opposition would not chair the PAC. What is the contention is that the person who is presently the chair, unless the APNU and AFC is saying to us that the only person fit and proper on their side to be the chair is Mr. Patterson, then obviously you seem to be devoid of fit and proper people. But Mr. Speaker, there's no entitlement for the chair. There's no entitlement by any individual for a chair. And this is not entitlement of an individual. What has occurred is that the committee has been held to ransom, like the APNU AFC tried in the March 2nd elections, to hold on to power desperately. They defied the Constitution and took us all to the way to the apex court of this country to prove that 33 was the majority. Took us all the way to the court to show the appointment of Mr. Patterson as the chair of GCOM was unconstitutional and unlawfully appointed. Took us to the Caribbean Court of Justice to be able to be told that there was a caretaker government that had to run this country, and it had restricted legitimate powers and legislative powers. We had to be embarrassed and ashamed as a nation to be made mockery of. And so you can stand here sanctimoniously and say what you want to say. History has written you down in it, and you can't erase it. The courts of the Caribbean Court of Justice and the courts of Guyana have all the records of your behavior and your attempt to hijack the elections of March 2020. And you know you didn't succeed. Despite your bullyism, despite your high-handedness, despite your efforts to prevent an election being held for 14 months, and then having had an election, then holding it back for 5 months and put people through torture in the midst of the COVID pandemic. And you come here today with crocodile tears to talk about people dying of COVID when you had done nothing for the first 9 months of COVID. You did nothing to protect our people. Not even one mask, not even a mask did you give to the people to wear. And you come here with crocodile tears today? Shame on you. But Mr. Speaker, since you have given such levity to my colleagues on the other side, I hope that you'll give me the same opportunity to respond to accusations that have been made that are terribly wrong. I have heard the comments made on Mr. Schuman. And the denigration of him as a member of Parliament, as the Deputy Speaker of this House, is reprehensible and should not be allowed. No member of this House should be spoken to like that. But it seems to be the habit in this House that you can say what you want to people, and you get away with it. And you know what? This is part of the bullyism. And I'm beginning to wonder, Mr. Speaker, if the bullyism is part of the DNA of the PNC APNU AFC in this House. Mr. Speaker, the motion, no chair of any committee has license to offend so repeatedly the standing orders. I have heard members saying that the motion didn't have about trying to make fiddling information. English is clear. The committee met December 28th, and in January several times, and on February 1st. And what transpired in the meetings in January, and the exposures there in the Auditor General's account of 2016, and the answers to the questions that were given, and the additional information that was provided by the ministry, led to deciding that this person was not a fit and proper person to chair the Public Accounts Committee of Guyana. I've heard Mr. Ford talk about that no disrespect was given to the Speaker, no disrespect was given to the clerk, no violation of standing orders. Mr. Speaker, the issue, Mr. Speaker, when they say no disrespect to you as a Speaker, please, you're just using words and you mean nothing. The Speaker wrote a letter on May the 3rd. No acknowledgement, no information to the Public Accounts Committee by the chair, by email, by electronic means, that I have received the letter and I will take action and comply as soon as the Speaker raises the issue of the COVID. Nothing, silence, silence. And you tell me that you don't respect the Speaker, don't disrespect the Speaker of this House? Who do you think you're talking to? Who do you think you're talking to, 5-year-old? Mr. Speaker, you say you don't disrespect the clerk. The clerk came twice, 3 times into the committee. It's in the minutes of the committee. He advised you what to do. He advised the chairman that the motion was in order and that he should put the motion. And the minutes describe what happened. Mr. Speaker, Mr. Ford talked about the matter should be voted on in the committee before it goes. Honourable Member Ford, yes, you're all honourable. The matter should be voted on in committee before it comes to the House. Mr. Ford, I think, is mixed up with the 5 o'clock in the morning. Who's honourable, really? The issue is that the gentleman who spoke last, that's the easiest thing to say. The gentleman who spoke last talks about the issue of the manner in which the motion came to this House. Mr. Speaker, the matter, Mr. Ford, the honourable member, has got the procedure wrong. What he was quoting from was the procedure for the chair in the House, not for the chair of a committee. Mr. Patterson Mataman was dealt with as the chair of the PAC at the first meeting of the PAC at which the Speaker chaired and in which the opposition member proposed Mr. Patterson, and there was no opposition to Mr. Patterson. So the issue of having to go through some torturous procedure that Mr. Ford spoke about is totally irrelevant. I've noticed the honourable members started to talk about installed government. We're not installed. We're elected by the people in a free and fair elections, and that we are the legitimate government of this country. Go home and suck your thumbs. Go sit in a corner and suck your thumbs. The reality hurts. The reality hurts, doesn't it? We are the legitimate. And by the way, if you have a problem with what we say, why don't you tell the United Nations, CARICOM, the Commonwealth, the Organization of American States, and the Carter Center, and the 100 countries who supported the struggle of the Guyanese people to be able to have their votes counted and recounted so that the government of their choice could be appointed. But you won't do that. You won't do that. So, Mr. Speaker, I've heard another member talk about the FMMA and making prophets of doom about the Parliament is going to, going into the bad direction and, democracy, etc., is at stake. Mr. Speaker, and using the FMA Act, the 222A article of the Constitution makes it very clear that the constitutional bodies, as all other bodies who receive taxpayers' money, must be reviewed by the House in the National Assembly. You again seem to have problems with this. Mr. Speaker, how can a chair of any committee be found to be violating standing orders openly and repeatedly, be allowed to continue in that position? The Parliament of Guyana cannot allow the level of any chairperson in any committee to believe that they are somehow impervious to democratic rule, to majority rule. Otherwise, what will we be doing? Setting up dictators? So you have repeatedly, serially repeated to undermine the standing orders. Mr. Speaker, you come here and give us lectures about democracy, and yet you are the greatest violators of democracy of Guyana. From the very first elections you rigged in 1968, in 73, the referendum in 78, in the elections of 80 and 85, you are serial election riggers. And then you tried again. You tried again in 2020 to steal the votes of the Guyanese people and hijack the election. And you come here sanctimoniously and talk to us about democracy? Please, it's too late in the morning for that nonsense. Mr. Speaker, the honorable thing for the member to have done was to have resigned. And he was given that option. And if the opposition does not feel that it wishes to take up the position, then the committee will function and it will elect a chairman day by day, as required by the standing orders. You can't have it both ways. You want the standing orders when it's in your favor, and you don't want the standing orders when it's not in your favor. The level of bullyism in this Parliament, the level of bullyism in that committee is unacceptable, and that's what you should be afraid of. That's what you should be afraid of in this Parliament. No chairperson is so entrenched and so entitled to the position that he cannot or she cannot be removed, just like a government can be removed. If a government can be removed, why not a chairperson of a committee? It's logical, isn't it? Isn't it logical? Or is it that the chairman of the Public Accounts Committee has Patterson written on the seat of the chair? That is his entitlement. Well, whatever deals APNU and AFC have made, or who gets what, then you better perform. We're not interested in your deals. What we're interested in is the chairman of the Public Committee carries out the job of the Public Accounts Committee and is not a serial violator of the standing orders of this country. Mr. Speaker, the motion that is before us, Mr. Speaker, the honourable member refused repeatedly to do as advised, to put the motion to a vote. And he refused over and over again. You know, Mr. Speaker, we live by our decisions. We live by the things we do. And Mr. Patterson had a chance to reprieve himself. He did not. And therefore, the consequence now, there is a motion calling for his removal from the Public Accounts Committee, which is totally in order according to the standing orders. I have avoided, Mr. Speaker, talking about the Auditor General's report or the Public Procurement Commission report on the Demerara Harbour Bridge feasibility study, or the other study about usage of money from the asphalt plant to pay the same company that was not appointed or hired by contract, by a tender, but by most inappropriate means of the minister going directly to the cabinet to get approval for a matter that never went to tender. And then paying not only the contract, but over the next 2 years, that company continued to get almost $200 million more and were paid through the Demerara Harbour Bridge. So please, don't come to us as if, you know, you're angels, you know, that you're angels. Mr. Patterson knows his vulnerability. He knows his vulnerability. And that there was chance between February 1st and May the 3rd for him to reprieve.
Honourable Minister, I just want to caution the Honourable Minister of Labour about calling people crooks. Honourable Minister, you may continue.
I have been called things in this Parliament today that I find reprehensible. I have heard the description of this government in words that are reprehensible, such as ethnocentric, what do you call it? Kleptomaniacs? And that was all acceptable language, Mr. Speaker. It's not acceptable language, whether it's said on that side or this side. And it can't be one side only being corrected. Mr. Speaker, I therefore, as I said in the very beginning, I had hoped that the honourable member would have done the right thing after receiving your letter. In fact, Mr. Speaker, your letter was May the 3rd. My motion was submitted a month later on June the 3rd. And there was every possibility for Mr. Patterson, please, Mr. Manipal, you're a really annoying noise in the background. Mr. Patterson had every opportunity. You know, it's 5 in the morning. You've had enough of you all day. Mr. Speaker, I think the members are pretending we're living in the dark ages. There's WhatsApp, there was email, there was telephone calls where the honourable member, as chair, could have said, I'm going to obey the Speaker's ruling. As soon as the COVID thing has been suspended, I will call a meeting, I will resign or whatever. He didn't do that. It is all about bullyism and showing your strength. So at this point, Mr. Speaker, we will have to show this House whether we are willing to be bullied or we're going to be able to stand up for the Constitution and the standing orders of our Parliament to make sure there's rule of law, transparency and accountability. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Honourable Minister.